I remember that day like it was yesterday. Harlan came home later than usual, looking tense, and I immediately sensed something was wrong. He didn't speak at first, just avoided my eyes. My heart started racing as I asked him what was going on. He took a deep breath and told me he was leaving me. I couldn't even process his words. Leaving me? For another woman? My stomach sank, and my hands started trembling. He said her name, Mirabelle. I froze. She was pregnant, he explained, and he felt he had to be with her. I tried to speak, to ask questions, but no words came out. It felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath me. Everything we had built together, all the little moments, the dreams we shared, it all seemed to vanish in an instant. I kept thinking, how could he do this? How could he just throw everything away? I remember walking to the bedroom, feeling numb, and sitting on the edge of the bed. I kept replaying our marriage in my head, trying to find the moment I had missed the signs. Did he ever love me? Was it all a lie? My chest ached, my eyes burned from holding back tears. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and utterly alone. The days after were the hardest. I barely ate, barely slept, and every little sound made me jump. Friends called, tried to console me, but I felt like no one could understand the weight of what I had just lost. Harlan had not just left me, he had abandoned our life, our home, and the trust we shared. I kept thinking about him with Mirabelle, imagining the life he was planning with her while I was left behind to pick up the pieces. I spent hours staring at the walls, trying to hold myself together, feeling like a stranger in my own life. But amid the pain, a small voice inside me told me I couldn't stay broken forever. I had to find strength, not just to survive, but to rise above what he had done. That day marked the end of the life I knew and the beginning of a journey I never expected, a journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and slowly, the quiet stirrings of my own power. Even now, thinking about it makes my chest tighten. The man I loved had left me, but somehow, I knew that this wasn't the end of my story, it was only the first chapter. Moving into the small apartment felt like stepping into a completely different life. The space was quiet, almost too quiet, and every sound seemed to echo the emptiness I felt inside. I spent hours staring out the window, watching the world continue while mine had stopped. Harlan's absence was everywhere, in the kitchen, in the empty side of the bed, in the quiet that replaced our laughter. I kept thinking about our life together, replaying conversations, moments, even small arguments, wondering if they had been signs I missed. Maybe I should have noticed something. Maybe I should have stopped him. My mind wouldn't stop racing, and yet, nothing I thought could bring back what I lost. I felt lost in a fog of confusion and sorrow. Friends called, visited, sent messages. They told me I was strong, that I would get through this, but their words felt distant. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate them, but no one could truly fill the space he had left behind. The emptiness was mine alone. I felt invisible even in a room full of people, carrying a weight that made simple tasks exhausting. Nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, I would stare at the ceiling, heart heavy, mind spinning. I questioned myself constantly, my choices, my worth, my ability to trust again. How could someone I loved and trusted betray me so easily? How could he walk away from everything we had shared as if it meant nothing? I kept turning over these questions in my mind, hoping for some kind of answer that never came. Even simple routines felt foreign. Cooking meals felt pointless. Watching TV felt empty. Walking outside made me feel like I didn't belong. Every corner of my apartment reminded me that my life had changed forever. Yet, deep down, a small part of me refused to break completely. I didn't know it then, but this period of quiet devastation would become the foundation for something stronger. I didn't realize it yet, but slowly, in the shadows of my heartbreak, I would begin to rebuild myself, piece by piece, stronger than before. A few months after Harlan left, I found myself cleaning out some old boxes he had left behind at our shared apartment. I didn't expect much, just a few old clothes and papers, but then I came across a stack of letters and notes tucked away in a drawer. As I picked them up, my hands shook. I started reading, and my stomach dropped. The letters were addressed to Mirabelle. They weren't just casual notes, they were detailed plans. Harlan had written about the life he wanted with her, how he would provide for her and the baby, and even ideas about moving, finances, and his future without me. The more I read, the colder I felt. Every word made it clear that he had thought about leaving me for months, maybe even longer. This wasn't a sudden decision, it had been carefully planned. I also noticed the promises he had made to me during our marriage: support, savings, plans for a home, and shared dreams. None of those had ever been kept. Everything I had believed in, everything I had trusted him with, was a lie. I felt a wave of anger rise through me. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was deliberate, calculated, and personal. I sat there in silence for a long time, holding the letters, trying to process what I had learned. It wasn't just about the heartbreak anymore. It was about how much control he had tried to take over my life, how carefully he had manipulated the situation to benefit himself while pretending to care about me. My grief began to mix with a burning determination. At that moment, I realized something important: I couldn't let him get away with this. I wouldn't just be the woman he walked away from. I wouldn't allow him to continue thinking he could manipulate everyone around him without facing consequences. The pain was still there, raw and sharp, but it was joined now by a quiet, steady fire inside me. I knew I had to act, not out of spite, but to reclaim my life and show him that betrayal and lies couldn't define me. From that day on, my heartbreak started turning into focus, and my sorrow began shaping a plan. After discovering the truth about Harlan, I knew I couldn't just sit and let him continue his life as if nothing had happened. I started keeping track of everything: his lies, his betrayals, and even the money he spent on Mirabelle and the baby. I wrote it all down carefully, not out of obsession, but to remind myself that I was in control of my own life now. At the same time, I focused on rebuilding what he had tried to destroy. I poured my energy into my work. I took on projects I had put off for years, improved my skills, and made my small apartment feel like a home again. I started cooking meals I actually enjoyed, decorating the space with things that made me happy, and even planted a few flowers outside my window. Every little change reminded me that my life didn't end when he left. I also made a point to take care of myself. I exercised, ate better, and spent time doing things that brought me joy. At first, it felt strange to focus on myself, like I was betraying the person I had once been with him. But slowly, I began to feel lighter, stronger, and more confident. The anger I had felt transformed into determination. Every success, no matter how small, became a quiet way of proving to Harlan that leaving me wouldn't destroy me. When I landed a big client for my freelance work, I felt a surge of pride. When I managed to save up enough to fix my car and pay off a debt he had ignored, I felt powerful. Each step forward was like a silent message: I was thriving without him. I realized that revenge didn't have to be dramatic or cruel. Sometimes, the best revenge was simply living well and refusing to be broken by someone else's selfish choices. Harlan had tried to control me and my life, but I had reclaimed it piece by piece. The spark of revenge wasn't about hurting him, it was about showing myself that I could survive, grow, and thrive no matter what he had done. That fire inside me kept growing, quietly driving me forward every single day. Months went by, and life slowly started feeling like my own again. I finally had the chance to focus on a dream I had put on hold for Harlan: starting my own catering business. At first, it was just small orders, birthday parties, local events, and family gatherings, but I poured all my energy into it. I experimented with recipes, learned new techniques, and slowly built a reputation for quality and reliability. Each satisfied customer, each positive comment, made me feel proud in a way I hadn't felt in years. I named the business Roxanne's Table, a personal reminder that this was my space, my effort, and my accomplishment. I started planning menus, managing deliveries, and even decorating my kitchen for efficiency. Everything I did reminded me that I could create and control my life without depending on anyone else. The satisfaction of seeing my small business grow gave me a sense of independence I had never experienced while married. Meanwhile, I heard from mutual acquaintances how Harlan's life was going. Raising a baby was harder than he had expected. Mirabelle seemed overwhelmed, and Harlan was constantly exhausted, juggling responsibilities he had ignored before. I couldn't help but notice that his so-called perfect life wasn't as easy as he had imagined. While he had thought leaving me would bring him happiness, the reality was far different. He had to face consequences for the choices he had made, and I watched quietly, feeling a mixture of relief and quiet vindication. My focus on my own life became even stronger. I spent weekends trying new recipes, experimenting with event setups, and networking with local vendors. Every little achievement, every small milestone, reminded me that I was capable of building a life on my own terms. It wasn't about proving anything to him directly, it was about proving to myself that I could rise from heartbreak, create stability, and find joy in my own accomplishments. By the end of those months, I had more than just a business. I had confidence, independence, and a life I genuinely enjoyed. Harlan's choices had left him scrambling, while I had taken control of my destiny. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free. It was a quiet evening at my catering shop when the bell above the door rang, and I looked up to see Harlan standing there. His face was pale, his clothes wrinkled, and there was a desperation in his eyes I hadn't seen before. For a moment, I didn't speak, I just stared at the man who had caused me so much pain. He explained quickly, almost stumbling over his words, that his baby with Mirabelle was very sick. Mirabelle, he said, refused to take responsibility and didn't want to deal with it. Harlan looked exhausted, scared, and completely unprepared. For the first time since he had left, he seemed powerless. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, disbelief, and a quiet sense of control. Suddenly, the tables had turned. He had always thought he could leave me without consequences, but now, he was standing in front of me, needing help. I listened carefully as he described the situation, noting every detail. I could see how unprepared he was, how much he had underestimated responsibility, and how much he had taken for granted. Every word made it clearer that his life with Mirabelle was nothing like the easy path he had imagined. The person who had left me with nothing now depended on me in a way I had never imagined. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence hang between us, feeling the power shift. I had a choice. I could help him, but on my terms, or I could walk away and let him face the consequences of his selfish decisions. The control I felt was intoxicating, but I also knew I had to be careful. This wasn't about revenge through humiliation, it was about making him see the reality of his choices. As I considered my decision, I realized how far I had come since he left. I had built a life, a business, and strength that he couldn't take away. I understood now that helping him wouldn't make me weak, it would show that I could be compassionate while remaining in control. That night, I made my choice, and in that moment, I knew the power had shifted completely. Harlan, the man who once abandoned me, was now the one who needed me, and I held the key. Seeing Harlan kneeling in front of me, pleading for help, was surreal. I had spent months imagining different ways I might confront him, but nothing compared to this real moment. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of the arrogance and confidence he had carried when he left me. I could see the fear and desperation in his eyes, and it stirred a mix of emotions inside me I wasn't prepared for: anger, sadness, and an unexpected curiosity. Anger came first, sharp and immediate. This was the man who had broken my heart, betrayed my trust, and left me to pick up the pieces of a life we had built together. Seeing him humbled made me wonder if he finally realized the consequences of his choices. Every plea from him felt like a reminder of the pain he had caused. Then came sadness, deeper and quieter. Even though he had hurt me, part of me still remembered the love we had shared, the life we had planned, and the moments that had once felt real. That part of me couldn't help but feel for the man who was now struggling in a situation he had ignored for so long. But alongside the anger and sadness, there was curiosity. Could I help him? Could I step into a role I had never imagined and guide him through a responsibility he had run from? And more importantly, could I make him feel, even just a little, the fear and helplessness that I had endured when he left? I realized this was a pivotal moment. The choice was mine entirely. I took a deep breath and studied him, weighing my options. Helping him could be seen as mercy, a chance to show compassion even after everything. But it could also serve as a lesson, a subtle way to make him understand the weight of his mistakes without me having to say a word. I felt power in that choice, a power I hadn't felt in years, the ability to decide how much influence he would have over me and my life now. In that moment, I knew the path I took would define both of us. Harlan's fate was in my hands, and for the first time I held the balance. I could choose mercy, or I could choose the lesson he needed. Either way, I was in control. I decided to help Harlan, but only on my terms. I made it clear that nothing would ever be the same between us. He couldn't expect forgiveness, sympathy, or a return to how things had been. I would help him, yes, but I would also make sure he understood the consequences of his actions and feel the weight of responsibility he had ignored for so long. From the start, I set boundaries. I told him that I would guide him through taking care of his child, but he would have to do the work. I wouldn't do it all for him, and I wouldn't let him hide from the responsibilities he had run from when he left me. He had to step up and learn, no shortcuts, no excuses. Watching him stumble, make mistakes, and struggle was part of the lesson. Every moment of difficulty was a chance for him to realize what he had lost when he left our life behind. At the same time, I focused on myself. Helping Harlan didn't mean going back to being hurt or dependent. I stayed strong, keeping my work and my life moving forward. I reminded myself constantly that this was my choice, and I could control how much influence he had over me. I had rebuilt my confidence, my business, and my independence, and I refused to let him shake that now. Every interaction became a lesson for him and a test for me. I could see the frustration in his eyes, the exhaustion, and the guilt. He had never expected life to be this difficult, and now he was living the consequences of his choices. Meanwhile, I stayed composed, calm, and in control. The anger and heartbreak I had felt were still there, but they were now joined by determination. I wasn't helping him out of weakness, I was showing him that I could be compassionate while still maintaining power over my own life. Through it all, I realized something important: reclaiming control was just as satisfying as revenge. I wasn't just teaching him a lesson, I was proving to myself that I could rise above betrayal, set boundaries, and turn pain into strength. Harlan's struggle became a reflection of my own resilience. I had the power, and I wasn't letting it go. Over the weeks, I watched Harlan struggle like never before. Caring for a child was harder than he had imagined, and the responsibilities he had ignored for so long weighed heavily on him. He was constantly tired, frustrated, and overwhelmed. Simple tasks that I had once managed without thought now seemed impossible for him. I could see the frustration building in his eyes, the helplessness in his hands, and the guilt in his voice whenever he realized how unprepared he had been. He began begging for forgiveness, tears streaming down his face, pleading for understanding, and trying to explain why he had left. But it was clear that the emotional damage he caused wasn't something that could simply be fixed with words. The trust he had destroyed, the pain he had caused me, and the life he had abandoned couldn't be erased. No matter how much he apologized, the weight of his choices hung over him like a shadow. Meanwhile, my own life was flourishing. My catering business, Roxanne's Table, was thriving, and I was finally enjoying the success I had worked so hard to achieve. I managed clients, events, and new opportunities with confidence. Every order, every satisfied customer, felt like a reminder of how far I had come. I was independent, strong, and in control of my own life, free from the pain that Harlan had caused me. Seeing him struggle while I thrived brought a quiet sense of justice. It wasn't about revenge in a cruel way, it was about the natural consequences of his actions. He had thought leaving me would make his life easier, but reality had humbled him. The man who once held power over my heart and my life was now powerless to hurt me. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, my success, my confidence, and my self-respect were proof enough. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Harlan's struggles were a reflection of the choices he had made, and my growth was a reflection of my strength. The scales had finally balanced, not through anger or spite, but through life itself, showing me that the best justice often comes from simply living well and moving forward. Months later, I decided it was time to see Harlan one last time. I wanted closure, not for him, but for myself. When I met him, he looked different than I remembered. The arrogance and confidence were gone, replaced by weariness and regret. He apologized, his voice trembling, trying to explain himself, trying to ask for forgiveness. But it was too late. The man who had left me, who had betrayed my trust and abandoned our life, had lost everything that truly mattered to him. I listened quietly, letting him speak, but inside I felt nothing but calm. I had no anger left that could hurt me. I had already reclaimed my life, my strength, and my dignity. Harlan's words couldn't shake the foundation I had built. I realized that the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the pain he caused me had all been part of what made me stronger. I was no longer the same person who had cried alone in that small apartment months ago. I looked at him and felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The silent revenge had already been completed, not through cruelty, but by living my life fully and refusing to let him define my happiness. My business was thriving, my confidence unshaken, and my independence secure. I had proven to myself that I didn't need him or anyone else to validate my worth. Harlan could apologize, beg, or regret his actions, but none of it mattered anymore. He had experienced the consequences of his choices, and I had experienced the power of reclaiming my life. I realized then that sometimes the universe balances the scales in ways we cannot control. It doesn't always happen immediately, and it doesn't always come in the form we expect, but it comes. I walked away from that meeting with my head held high, knowing that I had survived betrayal and heartbreak, and that I had turned it into strength. The past no longer controlled me, and Harlan no longer had power over my life. I felt free, whole, and complete. The chapter of pain was over, and a new chapter of life, self-respect, and quiet triumph had begun.